At a flea market, a little boy sells his only toy car to get medicine for his sick mom. A billionaire CEO walks by and sees him. Owen held the small, broken-down toy car in his hands and ran his thumb over the bright red paint that had been on it for years. He had loved it for as long as he could remember. His mom gave it to him for his 4th birthday. She was healthy back then, and her laughter filled their small flat, like sunshine coming in through the front door. Things are different now. Now, she only laughed when she thought he wasn't looking. Other times, she smiled and whimpered when she was tired. They had written her a prescription, but the medicine was too expensive for them to pay for. Owen heard her asking the chemist if there was a cheaper choice. She had a rough voice, and her hands were on the counter. That wasn't it. What happens next will shock everyone. But before we start, let's do something fun. Comment your location below. Let's see who's watching from a farthest place. All right, let's begin. He was holding on to his toy like it was the most important thing in the world at the flea market, which it was. It was always that way. But no longer. That drug was for his mom, not him. He picked up his few toys and put them neatly on an old crate, but it was clear that the car was the real prize. Owen was set on going, even though his mom told him to stay home while she cleaned up. He wasn't going to do anything while she got worse. As they went by, some people gave him a quick smile before going on, while others barely looked at him. Every time someone walked by without stopping, his heart sank. He tried to yell, but the market was too loud for his small voice to be heard. I have a toy car for sale. It's really unique. A man with a wild beard stopped, looked at the things, and then shook his head. Kid, how much is the car? Owen stood up straight. $10. The man made a low whistle sound. That toy car cost a lot. Owen raised his voice and said, It's important. This is my best. He thought for a moment and then sighed. Sorry, kid. I can't do 10. Owen held on to the toy even tighter after he left. Minutes went by. The sun got warmer. Owen could feel worry making his stomach twist. What if no one bought it? What if he had to leave without anything? He felt his throat get tight at the thought. After that, a shade covered him. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stood in front of Owen when he looked up. Being around him made people move out of the way, even though he didn't say a word. He held a coffee in one hand and looked through his phone with the other. His dark hair was styled nicely, but something stopped him. It could have been the way Owen stood there, strong but small, or the way his little hands gripped the car like it was lifeblood. No matter what it was, the man put down his phone and knelt down so that he could see. What do you have for sale? Owen stood up straight, his heart beating fast. My car. He held it out carefully, almost with awe. The man looked at it. He looked at Owen's face and the toy with sharp blue eyes. How much? Owen was unsure. Should the price go down? Like the other man, would this one walk away? He couldn't, though. He had to have the cash. He was firm and said, $10. The man looked at her funny. That must be a very cool car. Owen said yes. Yes, it is. We don't have enough money to buy my mom's medicine, though. The words were simple and not based on self-pity, but they hit hard in the space between them. The man's face changed slightly, and there was something that couldn't be read on it. He looked down at the car one more time, then at Owen, and then he reached into his jacket pocket. He said, I'll take it. Owen took a deep breath. Really? The man said yes. But instead of his wallet, he pulled out a thin book of checks. He wrote down something, tore the check, and gave Owen the money and the car. This way. Owen blinked and looked lost. He thought there would be a few crushed bills, and maybe a $10 bill, but his breath caught when he looked down. $10,000. As he looked at the number, his fingers were shaking. He was not sure if he had ever seen so many zeros in one place. When he felt the sting of tears against his eyes for the first time since he got to the market, his stomach turned. He took a deep breath. He said in a whisper, This is too much. The man spoke in a calm but strong tone. That's how much it's worth. Owen did not understand what to say. He thought his heart was going to burst. He said, Thank you. Thank you very much. The man smiled and nodded. Kid, what's your name? Owen, Owen, please give that check to your mom. Owen held onto it tightly, as if he was afraid it would slip away. I will. The man thought about what to do for a moment before getting up and lightly ruffling Owen's hair. Watch out for her. After that, he turned around and walked away, and Owen couldn't even ask what his name was. Owen didn't wait around any longer. Putting his other toys in his rucksack, he ran all the way home, his little legs beating as fast as they could. He rushed through the apartment door, panting and red-faced. Emily jumped off the couch in surprise. Owen, where have you been? He threw the check into her hands and almost flew into her arms. Mom, we can get the medicine. Everything is ours to buy. Emily took the paper with a puzzled look on her face. She gasped and put her hand to her mouth when she saw the amount, though. Owen, where did you get that? He just said, I sold my car. As she pulled him close and held him so tight he could hardly breathe, tears filled her eyes. Oh, sweetheart, she said in a low voice, full of feeling. You did not need to do that. He said, but I wanted to. But her shoulder hid his words. Please be safe. She stepped back and looked at him with love that hurt his chest. I'm fine, Owen. I have you. He thought about the man at the market that night as he lay in bed. That man had given him more than just money. He gave him hope. Owen also thought he would see him again. Emily sat at the kitchen table for a long time after Owen had gone to sleep, looking at the bill as if it were going away as soon as she opened her eyes. $10,000. It was an impossible number, and she shouldn't have had it in her hands. Still, there it was, real and solid in her shaking hands. She should have been thrilled, but she had a persistent question in her heart. Who was this guy? Why would someone they don't know pay such a huge amount for a toy car? There was nothing about it that made sense. However, she then looked at Owen. His little body was curled up under the blankets, and he was breathing quietly. At that very moment, she knew she couldn't question a miracle. She made the call in the morning. They told Emily that the medication was ready, and within hours, Emily had the medicine in her hands for the first time in months. She felt a sense of relief that she hadn't had in years. She stressed out a lot and pretended to be tough for Owen for a long time. She let herself believe for the first time that things might get better. They did it. It didn't get better right away, but it got better over time. After about a week, she started to feel better. The constant pain in her bones went away. She slowly started to get up from the tiredness that had been pulling her down like quicksand. Now she didn't have to sit down after going up the stairs. When Owen reached for her hand, she didn't have to hide how much it hurt. Her real, spontaneous laughter came back, filling their small flat with warmth once more. As her strength came back, so did her drive. It was not her nature to take a gift like this without giving something back. The first thing she did was call all the places she had applied to before. Now that she felt hopeful again, she got a job at a small design company. In addition to not being exciting, it wasn't paying very well either. It was stable, though, and being stable was even better than she had hoped. Owen smiled when she told him. He told her, "That's awesome, Mom," with pride in his brown eyes. "As of now, we shouldn't have to worry." She brushed his hair back and kissed him on the face. "All right, kid." She said it, but her mind kept going back to the man at the junk market. He was the one who had made it all possible. What did he do? Would she see him again? Until then, it was impossible for James Reeves to forget about the little boy. At first, he did it on the spur of the moment when he saw a child badly selling a toy car in the middle of a flea market. Still, he couldn't help but think about that moment more often these days than he wanted to. He didn't buy the toy to make money. He didn't think $10,000 was important. But something deep inside him was uneasy because the boy was so honest. The child's voice had been sad and raw, but not for himself. It was for his mother. For James, it was something new to see. He had never been through anything like that before. He grew up in a wealthy and privileged family. While James worked with many powerful people, that little boy seemed to be stronger than most of them. He was now left with a question. Has the mum really spent the money? Did it help? Was she better? James wasn't the type of person to care about other people. He tried to forget about them, but he couldn't. But this was different in some way. After work one night, James told his driver to go in a different direction. The address on the check was only there to make sure it was real, nothing else. However, he had learned it without meaning to. The building was easy to find, a small apartment complex tucked away on the edge of town. He didn't move when the car pulled up. He wasn't supposed to be here. What was he going to do? Knock on the door and make himself known? That wasn't even funny. He almost changed his mind, but something moving near the door caught his attention. A woman and a little boy came out. The boy laughed and pulled on the woman's hand. Those laughs. It felt like home. James knew the man because of the messy brown hair and determined look in his eyes. It was him. But James didn't stop because of the boy. It was the mother, Sheila. He thought she would be something else. The way Owen had described her, she had been weak and tired when he thought of her. There was a beautiful woman in front of him, though. She looked like she was still a little thin, like she was getting better from something, but her cheeks were colored. There was life in her face that wasn't there before. She looked lovely, in a way that was simple, in a way that made his chest move before he could stop it. In general, James didn't doubt himself, but at that moment he did. He was going to check in because he was interested, but as he watched her laugh while she bent down to tie Owen's shoe, he felt like he was being watched. Still, Owen saw him before he could turn away, and before James could even think, Owen took off running across the street on his short legs. The little boy's eyes got really big. He waved his arms and said, "Hey, it's you." Emily turned around when she heard Owen's words. She looked at him with confused eyes. She stopped moving when she saw James. No one moved for a second. After that, James spoke up, but he wasn't sure what to say. Owen quickly told his mother, "This is the guy," before he could say anything else. The person who bought my car." Emily took a deep breath. James put out his hand, and the corner of his mouth turned up a little. "James Reeves." Emily thought about shaking it for a moment, her fingers feeling warm against his. "She is Emily Harper." When she looked at him, her eyes showed that she was both wary and thankful. James didn't know what to say for the first time in a long time. Owen smiled at him, not realizing the stress that was there, but not said, "So you came to see how we were doing?" James didn't say anything before nodding. "I guess I did." While Emily's lips were split in surprise, he thought for a split second that she might tell him to leave. She smiled slowly after that, though. "Would you like to come in?" James didn't know why he said yes. He felt something, though, as he followed them inside. This was just the beginning. Emily had always thought it was important to return favors. Her goal was to never owe anyone anything, no matter how bad things got. It was a matter of pride, with honor, to show herself and everyone else that she could stand on her own 2 feet. Still, she was there, holding a package in her hands. She stood outside of the tall glass building that houses Reeves Enterprises, not sure if she was doing something wrong. 2 weeks had passed since James Reeves came into her life. Everything had changed during that time. The medicine worked, and each day she felt better and stronger, more like herself. With her new job at the design company, she finally had enough money to pay her rent and still have money left over for groceries. It had been years since she had this much money. However, she couldn't get rid of one thought, no matter how much better things got. $10,000. It was a gift that was given for free. She didn't agree with it, though. It wasn't hers to give. She also couldn't sleep because she knew she still owed money, even though James had never called it that. This is what she always did when something made her feel bad. She faced it straight on. She took a deep breath and walked through the front door of the building. The air inside was clean and cool, which was very different from her small flat, which was warm. She felt so out of place in her used jacket and shoes from the thrift store as she walked up to the front desk. The front desk worker hardly looked up. Emily tried to keep her voice steady and said, "I'm here to see James Reeves." The woman looked at her with doubt. "Do you have something planned?" Emily moved the envelope around in her hands and said, "No, but I only need 5 minutes from him." The front desk worker sighed, as if she had heard that request a million times. "Mr. Reeves doesn't attend meetings that aren't planned." A familiar voice cut through the air before Emily could answer. "Angela, it's all right. Let her through." She looked up and saw James standing a few feet away. He looked right into her eyes with those sharp blue eyes. He was wearing another expensive suit and looked just as sure of himself as the first time they met. Now there was something else, something kinder. Emily gulped because his eyes were so heavy on her. He cocked his head towards the lifts, which was a silent request. She followed him without saying a word. His office was huge and had windows all the way up to the roof that looked out over the city. That kind of space made her feel even smaller than she already did. But she wasn't going to let it scare her. She put the envelope on his desk before he could even sit down. She told him, "This is for you." James leaned against the edge of his desk and scrunched up his face. "And just what is this?" Emily put her chin up. "This is the first part of what I owe you. It's not much, but I'll keep paying you back little by little until I get all $10,000 back." James didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't say anything. He just stared at her. He sighed and then took the envelope. It wasn't even open when he put it back in front of her. "No." She blinked. "What do you mean, no?" He said it again, crossing his arms. "I mean, no." Emily wasn't alone. "You don't need to repay me." Her jaw got tight. "Yes, it's not right for me to take money from someone I don't know well." James let out a sigh and shook his head. "You're not taking anything. It was important to Owen, so I gave it to him, just in case you needed it. That's all there is to it." Emily made hands tight because she was angry at how easily he brushed off something that was so important to her. "James, I don't feel like I owe you anything." He looked at her for a moment and then leaned in a little. He said in a low voice, "Then don't. I did it so you wouldn't feel like you owed me anything. Your son was ready to give up the one thing he loved the most to help you. So I did it. I appreciated that kind of love because it's not often seen." Emily could feel her resolution weakening. She was ready for pushback, but this was not it. "I don't understand." Not warmth. She took a deep breath. "Still, it doesn't feel right to just let it go." James sighed again, but this time his face showed that he was laughing. He stood up straight and said, "Okay, let's work something out." She made a face. "What's the deal?" "Let's start small since you want to pay me back." He picked up his phone from his desk and pressed a few keys. "Let me get dinner for you and Owen." She blinked. "Dinner?" "Yes," was an easy answer. "Do you want to do something for me in return?" "All right, let me get you both out." He put up his hand before she could add her point of view. "Look at it this way. You're not taking help. You're just having dinner with a friend." She got confused when she heard the word friend. Strange coming from a man like James Reeves, who was so different from her. Still, the way he said it made it seem real. She wasn't sure. Then he nodded. "Okay, one dinner." James's lips turned up in the tiniest smile. One dinner. Emily, Owen, and James met that night at a quiet Italian restaurant, which was a big change from the fancy, high-end places she thought someone like him would go. Owen was thrilled when he saw the huge wood-fired pizza oven when they walked in. Emily couldn't help but laugh as he excitedly told James all about his favorite toppings. James listened, which surprised her, not in a nice, unfocused way like adults often did with kids, but because they were really interested. Owen was already halfway through telling James about his favorite superheroes when the food came out. Emily found herself watching them, and she felt warm in her chest. She wasn't worried about bills or medicine for the first time in what seemed like a long time. She wasn't thinking about how much duty was weighing her down all the time. She was just there, taking it all in. Even though he was rich and powerful, James looked just as at ease as she did. Owen looked at his food for a while, and James looked at her. He told her, "You know, you should let yourself be kind once in a while." Emily let out a soft laugh. "I'm not used to it." James shook his head. "Perhaps you should be." She didn't know what to say in response, so she didn't. But as the night went on, she laughed more than she had in years. As Owen fell asleep on her shoulder on the way home, it was hard for her to shake the feeling that this man was becoming more than just a one-time act of kindness in their lives. James hadn't planned to see them again so soon after dinner for the first time in a long time. He was ready to get back to his normal schedule with all the meetings, deals, and carefully planned out activities that made up his life. That night, though, something had changed. Em had finally let down her guard, which could have been it. It could have been something else. But there was one thing that was sure. Emily Harper wasn't over with James Reeves yet. James had no idea what it was. That or the fact that Emily had let down her guard and laughed freely over pizza. Or how Owen had almost fallen asleep in the middle of a sentence, feeling totally at ease around James. Or maybe it was realizing that James himself had felt at ease for the first time in years. So, when he drove back to their neighborhood a few days later, he told himself it was just a quick stop, not anything else. Besides, he had already bought the toy car. He was allowed to check on the former owner. That was his reason when Emily opened the door and saw him standing there with a small bag. She was shocked. He held up the bag and said, "I thought Owen might want this back." Emily made a face. "What is it?" James smiled. "You'll have to ask him." She looked at him funny, but she let him in anyway, while she called Owen. When the boy saw James, he slowed down or stopped as he ran out of his room. "You came back." Owen smiled. "Did you bring snacks?" James laughed. "Not this time, but I did bring something for you." Owen quickly took the toy car out of the bag, which looked a lot like the other one but was brand new, shiny red, and not scratched. Owen's eyes got bigger. Whoa! He put it next to his old one and looked at how different they were. "It looks just like mine, but fancy." James put his back against the couch. "After all those years, I thought your first car deserved a break. Now you have one for important events." Owen smiled. "Like rich people have a fancy car they only drive sometimes." James smiled. "Exactly." Emily stood nearby and crossed her arms. "You didn't have to do that." James gave a sigh. "I wanted to." And that was the start of something they both didn't expect. James began to visit more often. He would always say he was just passing through to do something small, like bringing Owen a book he thought he'd like, or dropping off takeaway after a long day. He never stayed too long, never tried to push, but in some way, being there with him felt normal, well known. Owen was always happy to see him. And Emily, she didn't look as scared every time he came around. That Saturday afternoon, James joined them at the park and played baseball back and forth with Owen, while Emily sat on a bench and looked on with a smile. Owen told James he needed more practice after a fast throw that almost missed. She smiled and said, "You know, for someone who runs an empire, you're not very good at catching." The next ball was easy for James to catch, and he threw it back to Owen. "I give orders. CEOs do things like that." Owen laughed. "That's a fancy way of saying you let other people do the hard work." James made a face. "You're smarter than most of my board members." Emily laughed in her eyes even though she shook her head. They ate the sandwiches Emily had packed while sitting on a picnic blanket after the game. Owen laid down on his back and looked up at the sky. He was full and happy. "This is nice," he said in a sleepy voice. "It's like having a dad." There was silence. Emily tensed up and tightened her grip on the blanket's edge. James also felt his chest jolt, but Owen rolled over on his side and propped himself up on one arm before either of them could say anything. "Almost a dad," he said with a smile at James. "You're not really my dad." "But kind of," Owen said. Emily moaned and put her hand over her face. "Owen," she was shocked that James didn't seem at all upset. In fact, he was laughing so hard that it shook the room. He thought, "Almost dead, huh? That's a new one." Owen said yes. "Yeah, you're not as strict as a real dad would be, but you hang out with us and do cool things." "So, almost dead." Emily took a deep breath and rubbed her temples. "You can't just go around saying things like that, buddy." "Why not?" Owen looked at her with real confusion on his face. "I think Mr. James likes us." James looked at Emily with a smile on his face. He's not wrong. It looked like she was upset, but he could see that she was trying to hide a smile. Owen called him by that name after that day. James didn't tell him what to do. It wasn't pushed away, because he really didn't mind. He didn't want to leave as much as the time he spent with them. He had spent years in boardrooms, with rich and powerful people who only saw him as a business chance. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time in Emily's small flat, where Owen's toys were all over the floor and the smell of home-cooked meals filled the air. Peace. Emily was still unsure of what to do and looked at him warily when she thought he wasn't paying attention. James could tell she wasn't used to people staying around. She was getting used to him, though. Slowly but surely. She finally told him what was on her mind one night as they cleaned up after dinner. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know." James looked at her as he dried a plate. "Doing what?" "Being there. Having fun with us." "James, you're very busy." She looked at him and tried to figure out what it was. "Why are you still here?" He put the plate down and leaned against the counter. "Do you want me to stop?" She spoke, then shut her mouth. James shook his head. "Didn't think so." Emily rubbed her forehead and sighed. If this is only temporary, I don't want Owen to get along with her." James looked at her for a long time before he spoke. "Amy, I don't do things I don't want to. I'm here because I want to be." As she looked away, she swallowed. "That's what scares me." He didn't try. He did nothing and just let her be. Because it didn't matter how hard she tried to keep her guard up or how much she told herself, he was just a flash in their story. He had no plans to leave. James Reeves had built a calm life over many years, without a doubt. But with Emily and Owen, he began to understand that good things don't always go as planned, and that filled him with a deeper fear than anything else. James had consistently exercised caution. He devoted his life to assessing risks, making sure that he never committed too much of himself to anything that could be lost. Business was straightforward. The numbers followed a predictable pattern. Individuals can be influenced through appropriate motivations. However, feelings, connections, those were perilous. In an unexpected turn, he found that Emily and Owen had effortlessly bypassed the defenses he had meticulously constructed. For weeks, he convinced himself it was nothing. He was simply showing kindness. He was merely looking out for Owen due to his admiration for the boy's determination. Yet the reality was evident. The initial moment he realized he was still pondering Emily long after departing her apartment. It had become unmistakable. As he caught himself looking at his phone, anticipating a message that would never arrive, the truth became clear. When he began canceling meetings to spend an extra hour with them, sitting at their small kitchen table, listening to Owen discuss superheroes, while Emily tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled. That was the issue. James had experienced love once before. He had placed his trust in others previously. He was left in pieces. He promised himself that he would not allow it to occur once more. He withdrew. It began quietly. Minor justifications. A surprise business journey. A meeting that ran late prevented him from attending dinner with them. Emily initially accepted it without doubt. However, James noticed the glimmer of uncertainty in her eyes when he called off their plans at the last moment. He detected the uncertainty in her voice when he reached out to rearrange their plans. Nevertheless, he continued on, for if he allowed himself to draw any nearer, he would not endure the pain of her departure. Emily perceived the change, despite James believing she wouldn't. She had become adept at identifying the signs of someone distancing themselves, had experienced it far too often in the past. Her whole existence had revolved around the departure of others. Her father had left when she was too young to recall. The man who had bestowed upon her Owen, yet had never embraced the role of a father. The friends who vanished when challenges became overwhelming. She had come to understand that people often do not remain. However, James had stood apart. He had convinced her, if only for an instant, that perhaps she wasn't alone. Perhaps, for once, someone recognized her not as a burden, not as a woman battling to maintain her life, but as an individual deserving of support. And now he was fading away. Similar to others, she refrained from inquiring about it. She did not pursue him. She would never stoop to begging someone to remain by her side. Thus, she also withdrew. Dinners evolved into brief exchanges. The carefree laughter they once enjoyed transformed into cautious niceties. One evening, James canceled their plans, neglecting to suggest a reschedule. Emily interpreted that as the response she had been fearing. Owen observed even before she needed to speak a word. Though he was young, his intellect was keen. He had always possessed the ability to understand her in a manner that filled her with both pride and sorrow. "Did I do something wrong?" he inquired softly one night as she tucked him into bed. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. "Absolutely not, darling." "So, what's the reason James isn't visiting anymore?" She managed to smile, gently smoothing his hair. "He is occupied. He has many significant tasks to accomplish." Owen scowled. "I believed we held significance to him." Emily swallowed the knot in her throat. "I feel the same way." Owen remained silent. However, the following afternoon, as school was dismissed, he had devised a plan. James was surprised to find Owen waiting outside his office block. He had just finished a meeting, emerging from the sleek glass doors when he noticed the boy sitting on a bench near the entrance, legs swinging. His heart sank. "Owen." The boy glanced upward and smiled, yet there was an underlying emotion, something akin to disappointment. James experienced a knot in his stomach. "Are you busy?" Owen inquired. James swept his hand through his hair. "No, Owen, how did you arrive here?" "Bus." Owen started with a sense of clarity. "Mother is unaware." She would lose her composure. James let out a sharp breath. "Indeed, I can see that being the case." He knelt before Owen, striving to maintain a steady tone. "You can't simply venture out on your own, my friend." "It is not safe." Owen nonchalantly shrugged, swinging his legs with ease. "I have a question for you." James paused. "All right, what is it?" Owen tilted his head, examining him with an intensity that seemed unusual for a child of his age. "What's causing my mom to feel sad?" James experienced the question as a sharp blow to his side. He parted his lips, only to seal them again. "I am not." "You are." Owen interrupted. "She may not express it, but I can sense it. She has remained silent. She smiles, yet it lacks authenticity. It's the insincere one she puts on when she wants to keep me from worrying." James let out a breath, massaging the back of his neck. Owen scowled. "You have feelings for her, don't you?" The straightforwardness of it almost caused James to chuckle. He exhaled slowly. "It's intricate." Owen furrowed his brow. "Why?" James looked at him, struggling to articulate the years filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and the anxiety that accompanied deep affection. Yet, as he observed Owen, so sincere, so trusting, he understood that he could not deceive him. "Sometimes, when you care for someone deeply, it can be painful," James said softly. "I have no intention of causing any pain to your mother." "Or you." Owen inclined his head. "However, your departure is causing her pain." James took a deep breath. Owen released a sigh, his demeanor betraying a maturity beyond his years. "I may not be well versed in adult matters, but I understand that when people care for one another, they should remain together. If you're feeling scared, that's not really a smart reaction, because my mom is truly the best person ever. She has never caused harm to anyone. And if you bring her joy, and she brings you joy, what would be the reason to stop visiting?" James was at a loss for words. Owen leaped off the bench, positioning himself in front of him. "I ought to head home before she discovers I was here. However, it needs to be addressed." James observed the boy as he walked away, the heaviness of his words bearing down on him like a stone. He had devoted his whole life to the belief that keeping his distance was the sole method of safeguarding himself. By keeping his distance, he believed he could shield himself from pain. Owen was indeed correct. He was causing Emily pain. He was inflicting pain upon himself. For the first time in ages, James came to a startling realization. He was afraid. However, perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to cease fleeing. That night, James wandered restlessly through his penthouse, gazing at the city skyline, attempting to sort through the chaos in his mind. Owen's words echoed in his mind, persistent and unyielding. "Your departure is causing her pain." The young lad had indeed been correct. James had devoted his whole life to evading the concept of love, connection, and anything that might expose his vulnerabilities. And now, for the first time, he questioned whether he still had the strength to run. This time, walking away did not bring him a sense of safety. It left him feeling hollow. He contemplated Emily. Her calm strength. She bore the weight of the world on her shoulders, doing so without a single complaint. In that moment, James realized he could no longer resist the pull to return. He recalled how her smile lit up her face when she believed no one was watching, the gentle manner in which she addressed Owen as she tucked him in for the night. He reflected on how she had never once requested anything from him, not even after he had transformed her life with a single check. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. She found his wealth unimpressive, had no interest in his power. Her sole desire had always been for the well-being of those she cherished. James understood, with a sharpness that filled him with dread, that he loved her. The revelation struck him profoundly, rendering him speechless. He had not allowed himself to accept it previously, yet it had been present the entire time, gradually accumulating, biding its time until he found the courage to recognize it. In that moment, as he stood in his pristine, chilly apartment, a new realization dawned on him. If he failed to take action, if he didn't stand up for this, he would carry that regret with him forever. Thus, he placed a call. As morning arrived, he found himself standing outside an upscale collector's showroom, eagerly awaiting the doors to open. The individual who possessed a collection focused on unique artifacts, objects that would often go unnoticed by the average person. Yet for collectors, they commanded significant sums. James learned of him via a business associate. He was informed that he possessed a keen sense for sentimentality. That was precisely what James sought. The toy car was showcased behind glass, presented as if it were a work of art. It closely resembled Owen's, the identical make and model, only in flawless condition. Manufactured decades ago, it was part of a limited run that contributed to its value among enthusiasts. However, James was indifferent to its value. He was concerned with its significance. The collector stated his price. James remained unperturbed. Upon his departure, the car remained in his possession. Emily was surprised to encounter James once more, not after how he had distanced himself, not after the way she had compelled herself to acknowledge that whatever they had been creating had slipped through her fingers. She made an effort to avoid feeling bitter about it. He had shown kindness to her, to Owen. He had transformed their lives in ways she could never completely articulate. Ultimately, he had still chosen to walk away. She had resolved not to squander time mourning something that was never genuinely hers, to start with. That evening, when a knock echoed at the door, she opened it without any anticipation. Suddenly, she became motionless. James stood there, appearing as though he was on the brink of something unchangeable. His suit appeared a bit disheveled, as though he had been running his hands through his hair. His expression was enigmatic, powerful, looking exposed. In his hands, he cradled a small, meticulously wrapped box. For an extended period, silence enveloped them both. James then asked softly, "May I come in?" Emily gulped, her heart racing. Then, despite her reservations, she stepped aside. Owen, alerted by the sound, rushed in from the adjacent room. As soon as he laid eyes on James, his expression brightened. "You returned." James offered him a subtle smile. "Absolutely, my friend. I did." He knelt low, extending the box forward. "I have something for you." Owen's eyes grew large as he accepted the package, unwrapping it with a level of enthusiasm reminiscent of a child's delight. As the toy car materialized in his hands, his jaw dropped in astonishment. "Absolutely not," he whispered. "It resembles my own." James gave a nod. "I discovered it in a collector's shop. I thought you might find this useful." Owen examined the car closely, turning it over in his hands with great attention to detail. Then, glancing up at James, his demeanor shifted to one of seriousness. "But why is that?" James paused, looking at Emily before he responded. "Some things are truly worth holding on to." A change stirred in the atmosphere. Emily sensed it, like a burden resting heavily on her chest, an issue of significant importance. She couldn't tell if it was the intensity of James's gaze or the rapid pounding of her heart that made it difficult for her to think clearly. Owen, fixated on the toy, broke into a sudden grin. "This is absolutely amazing. I will place it beside my other one." He spun around and dashed towards his room, leaving the two adults behind in a profound silence. James let out a breath, massaging the back of his neck. "I'm not sure how to approach this," he confessed at last. "I am uncertain about how to be the individual who remains." Emily felt a constriction in her throat. "So, what brings you here?" He gazed at her, truly observed her. For the first time, his expression showed no hesitation. "I can't walk away from you," he said softly. "Owen." From this, he moved a bit nearer, his voice calm yet firm. "I made an effort, Emily. I convinced myself that this was beyond my reach, that I was unworthy of it. Yet, the distance from you was more painful than any risk I have ever faced." His gaze remained steady on hers. "I recognize that my history with trust isn't the strongest, but I promise you, I'm not running anymore." Emily felt a sharp sting in her eyes. She wished to trust him. She hoped to convince herself that this time, circumstances might change. Yet the fear remained. The uncertainty, the inner voice that had consistently cautioned her about the dangers of intimacy. James must have noticed it, because he reached out, softly taking her hands in his. "It's not just about you, Emily," he said. "I require your assistance. This is necessary for me. And if you say you don't share these feelings, if you ask me to leave this moment, I will." His grip tightened, ever so slightly. "However, if there's even a small part of you that wishes for me to remain, I promise, I will dedicate each day to demonstrating that I'm here to stay." Emily exhaled unsteadily. In that moment, spontaneously, instinctively, without hesitation, she moved closer and kissed him. James took a quick breath, taken aback. Yet, in that instant, his hands found her waist, drawing her nearer, intensifying the kiss, as if he had been longing for this moment for an eternity. As they finally separated, he leaned his forehead against hers, letting out a gentle laugh. "Well," Emily beamed. For the first time in ages, it truly felt authentic. "Yes," she murmured. "I do." Emily had always thought that love ought to be uncomplicated. She envisioned a serene and constant presence, one that resonated with the essence of home. However, being with James was anything but straightforward. It was powerful, consuming, and at times frightening. Yet it was genuine. After years of facing challenges on her own, she had finally come to the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, she no longer needed to navigate this journey by herself. James remained faithful to his promise. He did not withdraw once more. He was present each morning, coffee in hand. Each evening, he shares tales about his day. Each weekend, seeking a reason to whisk Owen away for an adventure. They had slipped into a pattern, something cozy, something inviting, something Emily had never allowed herself to desire. Yet, comfort proved to be a delicate matter. Before long, reality came crashing in. It began modestly. People gazed a bit too intently while they were out together. Soft murmurs linger in the corners of dining establishments. Several inquisitive looks were cast as James collected Owen from school. However, soon after, the headlines emerged. Emily had never considered herself to be someone of significance to the world. She was a dedicated single mother, striving tirelessly to provide her son with a good life. However, when a photographer captured a spontaneous image of her and James exiting a bookshop, their fingers gently intertwined. Everything shifted. Billionaire James Reeves seen with enigmatic woman. Is it love or just a casual encounter? From a challenged single mother to the billionaire's partner. Who is Emily Harper? James Reeves's new romantic partner. Is she pursuing his wealth? Emily had always overlooked tabloids in the past. Yet now, she found herself unable to evade them. Her image dominated gossip websites, with rampant speculation about her identity, her desires, and the reasons behind James's association with someone like her. She reminded herself to remain indifferent. She reassured herself that the views of unfamiliar people held no significance. Yet, it was unavoidable to notice the intensity of people's gazes. Whispers trailed behind her no matter where she went. The way the mothers at Owen's school began to regard her changed. She felt as if she were an object of scrutiny, analysis, and evaluation. And most troubling of all, she began to question whether perhaps they were correct. James observed right away. One evening, after dinner, as they sat together in her living room, Emily absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. He reached over and softly took it from her hands. She gazed up at him, taken aback. "Please put that down," he said gently. Emily let out a breath, reclining against the couch. "I am making an effort." He observed her, an inscrutable look on his face. "But," he inquired. She paused. "However, perhaps they have a point." His brows knitted together. "Concerning what?" She bit her lip and turned her gaze aside. "Our story. Regarding the ways in which we lack coherence." James's jaw clenched. "Emily, I mean, look at us, James," she cut in. "You are yourself, and I'm simply—" She released a humorless laugh, shaking her head. "I am simply a woman who was offering her child's toy car at a flea market." James gazed at her intently for a prolonged moment before placing his glass down with careful precision. "Please refrain from doing that." Her brow furrowed. "What should I do?" "Speak as if you lack value." His voice was steady yet soothing, the sort of tone that allowed for no debate. "You seem to think that my presence in your life is a favor to you. Do you truly understand the extent of what you've given me?" Emily blinked, taken by surprise. James leaned in, his eyes fixed with intensity. "My life was predictable prior to your arrival. Organized. Regulated. I believed that was what I desired." His voice became gentler, yet the gravity of his words lingered in the air between them. "Then you and Owen collided with it like a force of nature. And then, everything became incomprehensible. However, for the first time, I found that enjoyable. I enjoyed the uncertainty of what was to come. I enjoyed returning to a place that truly felt like home." Emily took a deep breath. "You are more than just a woman I happened to meet, Emily," he continued. "You are the most incredible thing that has ever happened to me. I'm not concerned with the opinions of certain reporters or disinterested housewives online." She released a trembling breath. "However, I feel out of place in your world, James." His lips formed a subtle smile. "Perhaps it's time for me to step away from my world and immerse myself in yours." She released a breathless laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "You are truly difficult to deal with." "I am serious." He extended his hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I am not concerned with the financial aspect. The press doesn't concern me. My concern is for our well-being. Concerning you. Concerning Owen. And I am here to stay." And in some way that sufficed. The media frenzy continued unabated. However, it grew simpler to overlook. James protected her from the most severe aspects, with his team ensuring that nothing ventured into the realm of harassment. The whispers faded in significance when she understood that, for the first time, she had someone by her side, prepared to defend what they shared. Then, one afternoon, everything transformed once more. Emily had just picked Owen up from school when a particularly daring reporter approached, microphone in hand. Emily stiffened, prepared to move aside. Before she had the chance to speak, Owen interjected. "Are you aware that Mr. James is already considered part of our family?" The reporter opened and closed their eyes in surprise. "Oh," Owen nodded with a grave expression, as if it were the clearest truth imaginable. "Indeed, he has a deep affection for my mom. I believe that signifies he loves me as well. He's sort of like my almost dad. However, I believe he will become my true father someday." Emily felt a sudden tightness in her throat. The reporter, visibly pleased by the surprise, let out a laugh. "Is that the case?" Owen smiled brightly. "Absolutely. The video gained immense popularity in just a few hours. James Reeves, a father figure. The heartwarming words of a young boy touch everyone. Single mom and billionaire. Is it more than a fling?" However, this time, the headlines failed to disturb Emily. For the first time, they had achieved something correctly. James was more than a fleeting presence in their lives. He was already part of family. The world had transformed significantly in merely a few brief months. The whispers had receded into mere background noise, the scrutiny transforming into just another fleeting narrative in the media cycle. What had once seemed daunting and unachievable now felt routine. "James is coming over for dinner." Owen hurried to him the instant he entered the room. Emily reached for his hand without hesitation. She had spent an extensive amount of time convinced that love was not destined for her, that it was a transient experience. something that others were fortunate enough to hold onto while she was left with merely the fragments. However, James had remained, regardless of the extent of her doubts, regardless of how often she attempted to persuade herself that this was merely a fleeting situation. He had never provided her with any indication that he intended to leave. As she sat beside him in his car, observing the familiar streets gliding by, she came to the profound realization that she had never felt more at peace. "Where are we headed?" she inquired, casting a sidelong look at him. James smiled slyly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "You will see." Owen, secured in the back seat, was nearly bursting with enthusiasm. "I understand, but I'm not meant to share that with you," Owen replied, a smile on his face. Emily arched an eyebrow. "Oh, so you're hiding things from me now?" Owen inhaled sharply, his breath catching in his throat. "Mr. James had me give my word." "It is a delightful surprise." Emily shook her head, a smile playing on her lips, yet she chose not to pursue the matter further. She had faith in James. She placed her trust in him as she had never done with anyone else. She was still adjusting to that realization. As James finally drove into the parking lot, Emily felt her breath hitch in her throat. The flea market, the location where everything started, where Owen had positioned himself with his small toy car and his resolute spirit, unwittingly initiating a chain of events. She faced James, her heart racing. "What is our purpose for being here?" Rather than responding, he exited the vehicle. Owen rushed out immediately after him, struggling to hold back his enthusiasm. Emily trailed behind, a twist of excitement forming in her stomach as James grasped her hand and guided her to the very place where she and Owen had once stood, filled with both desperation and hope. Then, from his pocket, James retrieved a small object, a miniature automobile. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The car was the issue. Owen's cherished, worn toy. The very one he had parted with that day without a second thought. The one that transformed everything. She gazed at James, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "How did you?" "I found it," James said quietly. "It took some time. It seems it went through several hands before I finally located it." He held the car in his palm, his fingers gliding over the worn paint. "Yet, I needed to retrieve it. This car, it was the beginning of it all. It brought me to you." Emily gulped, her throat constricted with feeling. Then, gradually, James lowered himself onto one knee, still grasping the toy car in his hands. Owen emitted a sharp gasp. "It is happening." Emily chuckled, her eyes brimming with tears as she covered her mouth with her hand. James looked up at her, his face radiating a profound love that caused her heart to swell with emotion. He opened the top of the toy car, uncovering something concealed within. A ring. Simple and understated. Not too much to handle. Clear and refined. Exactly like her. "I spent my entire life believing that love was something I needed to maintain at arm's length," James said, his voice unwavering yet laden with feeling. "If I allow myself to care too deeply, I risk ending up with nothing." He inhaled deeply. "Then you and Owen arrived and completely changed my world. And then, all at once, I no longer wished to remain distant. I desired to be present at this moment, alongside you, always." Emily's vision became hazy as a tear rolled down her cheek. James proceeded, his tone now more gentle. "I cherish you, Emily Harper. Your strength, kindness, and stubbornness are truly admirable. Your generosity is remarkable. You've offered me so much without ever asking for anything in return. And I adore Owen more than I ever imagined I could." He glanced at the boy before turning his gaze back to her. "If you would like to have me, I desire to belong to this family. Indeed, for eternity." Owen was nearly buzzing with enthusiasm. "Please say yes, Mom. Please." Emily released a tremulous laugh, glancing between James, the ring, and the boy who had unwittingly united them all. In that instant, she realized her heart held no more doubt. "Yes," she murmured. Then, with increased intensity, as she knelt and embraced James, "Yes, yes, yes." James breathed out deeply, embracing her tightly as the burden of it all, the doubt, the anxiety, the long years of solitude dissolved. Owen celebrated, bouncing with excitement. "Mr. James is now officially my dad." James chuckled, gently tugging Emily back, just enough to slip the ring onto her finger. "Are you all right with that, my friend?" Owen smiled widely, nodding enthusiastically as his curls bobbed with each movement. "Absolutely. However, may I still refer to you as almost dad on occasion?" James wore a sly grin. "Feel free to call me anything you like." Owen launched himself at them, embracing them both with such fervor that Emily released a breathless laugh, encircling her arms around her son and the man who had inexplicably become her sanctuary. In an instant, the life she had always hesitated to envision became her reality. A love she never imagined she would discover. A family she never imagined she would possess. All of this happened due to a little boy, a toy car, and the man who had the courage to love them both. The subsequent days were brimming with joy, merriment, and a warmth that Emily had never imagined she would feel. Owen, brimming with enthusiasm, shared the news of the proposal with everyone: his teachers, the cashier at the grocery store, and even the mailman. James embraced it all, playfully ruffling Owen's hair each time he enthusiastically proclaimed, "My almost dad is my real dad now." The wedding was intimate. Only close friends and a handful of James's most trusted colleagues attended. However, it was flawless. Owen stood proudly beside them, beaming with joy as they exchanged vows. As James knelt after kissing Emily, meeting Owen's gaze and vowing to love him as his own, Emily felt a profound certainty settle in her heart. Their life was not lavish. They did not reside in a mansion, yet Emily remained determined to maintain her job, despite James having expressed that it was unnecessary for her to do so. Yet, that was what made it so beautiful. It was never about wealth, prestige, or external opinions. It was about the small moments: Saturday morning pancakes, late-night movies on the couch, the way James still arrived at Owen's school pickup, simply because he wanted to be there. Love had discovered her in the most unforeseen manner, yet it had been genuine, powerful, and deserving of every ounce of doubt and apprehension. As Emily settled into the living room one evening, observing James and Owen speed their toy cars across the coffee table, a realization dawned on her. This felt like home. This encompassed all that was needed. She wouldn't alter a thing. Did this story touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how powerful was this tale? Smash that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story that stirs your soul. For more heart-racing, emotional tales, tap the end screen now.